What's good in the hood, YouTube? This is Crazy Samurai, anyone here bringing you another video. Today I'm bringing you a video on Lupinranger versus Patoranger episode 7. This episode is called Always Saved, and it basically describes Lupin Yellow. We get to learn a lot more about her backstory, about who she is. It's good to see that we are getting individual character backstories, and she is one that, it's an unfortunate thing, but it makes sense with her character, and it will obviously help us understand who she is. But let's get into the actual episode itself. So, what does end up happening at the beginning of the episode is that we end up seeing that the Lupinrangers are working at the cafe. At the same time, the Patorangers are in the cafe, and they're just talking, and they discuss the fact that there was a gang attack at a steakhouse. So what actually happens is that Sequoia ends up mentioning, I was planning on taking Umika on a date, maybe. And the thing is that he ends up going up to Umika saying that I have off work tomorrow, why don't we go on a date to this restaurant or whatever. And she's kind of, being forced into this situation where, he ends up saying this and she ends up saying, oh no, I have work tomorrow, I can't do that. So all that happens, eventually the Power Rangers go off, and what actually happens is that we also see that Kairi is talking to some customers, at the same time Toma is cooking food. So that's important because, no one's helping her out in this situation. So what actually happens is that from here, Kagori arrives after all the customers have left, and he ends up giving them another mission that they have to do to get the next Lupin Collection item. And what happens is that we actually see a little image of what the Lupin Collection item is, which is a lamp. And this lamp is basically based off of the Magi lamp from Magiranger, the one that Magishine used. For those who don't know, Magiranger in America was known as Mystic Force. So yes, so that's very cool. What we end up seeing from here is that we end up seeing that this monster that's attacking these restaurants, we see a scene with him actually attacking a restaurant and capturing some people. So what actually happens is that it's not clear as to what he does with them, like whether or not they're killed or brought somewhere else, but the point is that they end up disappearing because eventually the Lupinrangers go after this monster. They end up fighting him, and eventually Lupin Blue is captured. Following this, what actually happens is that when Umika is about to be captured by this monster called Murgat Aita, what actually happens is that Kairi takes the hit, saving her and leaving her alone. So at that point, what ends up happening is that we end up learning that this Lupin Collection item allows this monster's stomach to expand so that he can capture a full human. So what actually happened is that these people that are gone, they were all eaten. He doesn't eat the food, he eats the people. Because the whole entire idea is that he thinks that people who have good taste in food, that come to these kind of nice restaurants and stuff, taste better than the actual food itself, because he gets the whole experience out of it. It's a weird, it makes sense for a monster to say that. In reality, it's like, ew, what are you doing? So anyway, what does end up happening is that from here, we actually see that Kairi and Toma are inside of this monster. They are in the digestive juices, and so what actually happens is that they have to be careful, because if they could actually be destroyed if they walk into the main area of the digestive juices, because there are certain areas in the stomach where they can stand on, but there's certain areas where if they stay in there, they could basically just be digested like food is. So that's kind of important to keep in mind. At the same time, we also see that Umika is kind of freaked out by the whole situation, and she freezes up and she hides in the restaurant behind a bar area. And what happens is that eventually the monster realizes that that third one must have disappeared. He ends up going off, and then following this, Umika heads back to the cafe. From there, we actually see a flashback of her past, where we saw her as a child, where she was coloring in a picture, and there were kids in her class that made fun of her for wearing the same kind of outfits and stuff. And then there was this girl named Shiho And the thing is that she actually protected the Umika, and so what actually happens is that we see all that happen, and eventually she was going to be entering into a comic contest, and because of her artistic abilities, Shiho, and the thing is that eventually she wins the contest. They plan on celebrating and having a good time, and what happens is that one day when they're heading back after the contest, when Umika is about to be attacked, Shiho takes the hit, and that leads to her being frozen. So basically this kind of gives us a clear context as to what actually led up to her friend being frozen. Now we know the whole story here as far as, how did things occur. Her friend got frozen and she ended up saving her in the end. So actually in reality, Umika would have been frozen. That's kind of an interesting thing to note. But yes, she was always saved. She was always protected. Shiho-chan protected her when she was young. She protected her when she was about to be attacked by a gangler monster. And just in general, Kairi and Toma protect her a lot of times too. So that's very important to remember. And that's where the whole entire idea of the episode being called Always Saved comes into play here. So, yes, very important to note that what we do end up seeing from here is that she kind of worries how she's going to be able to deal with the situation. Kaguri actually arrives in the bistro, basically trying to present to her, the verses changer, basically saying you chose to be a thief because you chose to do that. You were trying to save others and do right by people. And she basically changes her whole mindset about things, and eventually she ends up contacting Sequoia. Why? Well, the thing is that eventually she actually ends up looking into a magazine that most likely this monster was using to determine what restaurants to go to. And she ends up skimming through it, finding the restaurant that most likely this monster will go to, and she ends up taking Sequoia on a date. So it isn't really an actual official big time date, but it's a setup for a date so that she can deal with this monster. So what ends up happening is that eventually Sequoia arrives on the date. He's dressed up nicely, and then eventually Umika arrives with a nice outfit. Her hair is a bit messy, but Sequoia doesn't care. Sequoia loves her. It's very clear from the start that he just finds her beautiful. And so the thing is that they end up talking and everything and just kind of having a casual conversation, though Umika's kind of uncomfortable in the situation while Sequoia's trying to be, all sweet and stuff, and just finds her really pretty, and she's just really uncomfortable. It's so obvious. But what does end up happening eventually is that Mergat ends up arriving, and at that point Sequoia ends up having to go into action and fighting Mergat. So eventually they end up heading out of the building, and at that point what actually happens is that Umika puts on her masquerade outfit to go out and be in disguise. So she ends up wearing that outfit. Eventually the other Power Rangers end up helping Sequoia because Sequoia contacts them saying that there was a monster attack at the restaurant that he's at. And so what actually ends up happening is that they end up arriving there. Eventually, Umika decides to use her, grappling hook, line or whatever, to kind of swing in and use her, her dial fighter to, open up Margot's Lupin Collection chest and get out the lamp Lupin Collection item. And at that point what happens is that his stomach, it's a small, it was really big, but now with the Lupin Collection item gone, it's small. And so what actually happens is that the monster throws up all these humans and also the Lupin Rangers that were captured in there. So at that point what ends up happening is that the Lupin Rangers are seen by the Power Rangers. They're not seen as their human selves. They're seen all in their masquerade uniforms. So there's still a mystery to the Power Rangers, but it is an interesting situation. So what does end up happening from here is that the Lupin Rangers do end up transforming. We end up seeing them do different attacks. Eventually, this ends with the Lupinrangers using the Cyclone Dial Fighter to do a finishing attack with the other Lupinrangers, but Lupin Red is the one that kind of leads that whole thing. And following this, a whole bunch of trees crash down upon Margot, and things are good. Following this, from here, what actually happens is that Goody arrives, and Goody initially was thinking of actually joining the Lupinrangers, but the thing is that the Lupinrangers are like, we're done for today. So what ends up happening is that Goody is then asked by the Power Rangers to actually join them. Like he's being told, oh, come with us, and he's like, oh, I love being needed. So at that point, he goes to the Power Rangers, and they end up forming Patoranger. So at that point, we end up seeing Patoranger formed. Eventually, he ends up fighting Margot, because Margot does end up getting big, and what we end up seeing is that the Power Rangers actually use the biker trigger machine this time, so that they form Patoranger Biker, and it's an interesting thing because the biker has like a yo-yo aspect to it, so that's kind of cool. And doing lots of bashing attacks, and just in general managed to beat up Margot. And following this, the episode pretty much ends with us seeing everyone back in the bistro, where Umika is now in a better way now. And at the same time, what we also see is that the Power Rangers arrive, and Kairi sends Umika over to talk to them, but the thing is that she doesn't want to do it because of her experience with Sequoia, and because of her feelings towards him are really unclear, and just in general, she's kind of like bothered by him. So what does end up happening is that eventually, Sequoia says, you're not just cute, you're just super nice, because like she actually offers to pay for his meal because they weren't able to have a proper meal when they were on their date. And so what does end up happening is that whole thing is expressed. Eventually, Umika goes elsewhere, and we also see is that Tsukasa ends up looking at the people in the bistro, and by that I mean Kairi, Umika, and Toma, and looks at them and kind of tries to imagine them with the masquerade uniforms on, and she begins to suspect that maybe they're the same people, which is very important because this is 7 episodes in, and she's already suspecting that they may actually be the Lupinrangers they've been fighting this whole time. So that's going to be very interesting to see. The preview clip does end up showing that they are going to be, being considered for arrest, like they're going to be seen as the Lupinrangers and all that. It's unclear as to what that will actually lead to, whether or not their identities will be unveiled, or will it be the situation where they'll somehow be able to kind of, lie or fake their way out of it for now. Because again, I don't know anything for sure. It could turn out that they decide to do things a certain way. We'll have to wait and see, of course, as to whether or not their identities will be unveiled, or will it be the situation where they'll find some way around it so that they can stay hidden and not be targeted right away when it comes to the Power Rangers knowing their identities. We'll have to wait and see. Please remember to like, comment, subscribe. I'd love to know your guys' opinions. What did you guys think of this episode? I personally thought it was pretty good. It's nice to see the the biker dial trigger machine use this episode, and also good to see Umika getting some real focus this episode. I do like her character a lot. I didn't really care for her at first, but I've actually liked her a lot more now. And just in general, Lupinranger versus Patoranger has been pretty decent so far. I do want to see where it will go from here, of course, but yeah, I'm liking what I'm seeing. I have to hope that things will just only get better and better from here. We're still very, very early into the season, so please remember that as well. I'd love to know your opinions about this episode, and I will see you guys in the next video. So until then, guys, I'm Crazy Samurai 71, and goodbye, guys.